Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, we've often spoken about the different dimensions that the Gen Z generation has to face as they enter into the workforce. We've looked at the need for having a good culture. And we've often also said that in the war for talent, talent is actually one. So, what are the ways in which the employer creates a value proposition? Today, we're going to examine what does it mean for the Gen Z, especially in the startup context, right? So if I'm a young Gen Z, how do I look at startups? And from the startups perspective, what are the ways in which I can recruit the young talent, right? There's a massive need for young talent, experienced talent, but what's my value proposition? What could my recruiting strategy? So we're going to examine various dimensions on that. And to help me with that is my guest, Ashutosh Garg. Ashutosh, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nikhil. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashutosh. And friends, as we've always done with all our episodes, I'm going to briefly read Ashutosh's very illustrious career. Ashutosh Garg is based in Delhi. He's worked for corporate sector for 25 years. He was with ITC for 17 years. And leaving in 1995 as the MD at one of the group companies. Later on, he spent 8 years in the aerospace industry as the head of the Asian operations. He founded the Guardian Pharmacy in India in 2003, grew to the second largest pharmacy chain in India with over 200 stores. And he's also a certified business executive coach and mentors several CEOs around the world. Ashutosh, in January 1995, was recognized as the global leader for tomorrow by the World Economic Forum Switzerland, active member of YPO, author of 9 books, as very frequently featured on CNN News 18 as a panelist, and so on. So it's just a very illustrious background that Ashutosh has, but is kindly requested me to keep it brief. So Ashutosh, once again, welcome and glad to have you.
Thank you, Nikhil. Pleasure to be on your podcast.
So Ashutosh, we begin as with all our guests. I know that you perhaps right from the corporate innings to your innings as the entrepreneur, as an author, to as a coach, what is left for you to do, right? I'd love to hear what else can the viewers know about you in addition to what I've sort of shared.
Well, Nikhil, I've often said, and we're talking about Gen Z, but I'm from the boomers generation. I'm 67 years old, but I started life with ITC when I was 21 years after my MBA. And I think one of the most important things that I have all done is to have remained curious. And when I say remain curious means that there is always something new for each one of us to learn, for each one of us to understand, irrespective of what age you are at, irrespective of how much you may have achieved, how much you may be wanting to achieve. And that has always driven me. I mean, at my stage of life, I'm investing a huge amount of my own time in learning artificial intelligence. Because I think it's something that I want to learn. So I think there is no shortage of things to learn and things to do.
Absolutely. What a great message to start out our podcast. And I hope that our young Gen Zs are looking at it that, there's no limit to, what we can absorb. And there's so much for each one of us. So Ashutosh, our focus today is going to be about you in your career, obviously led a large company. You've also been a very successful entrepreneur where you build it from scratch. And obviously, that has been perhaps would have been a very different experience. So our focus today is looking at talent from kind of a startup context. So help us understand that if I'm a young company, a very young startup, right? What are the ways in which I go about recruiting talent, and how much of that can be composed of young talent, right?
So, Nikhil, the way I look at it is that when you are a startup, the first set of people or the first set of 15, 20 people you hire will come primarily because of your own credibility. Young people don't have enough confidence. Why young people? Nobody has enough confidence that where will your startup go, but they trust you as the founder. So the first set of people who will join you will be people who trust you as an individual. And therefore, as a startup founder, it becomes even more important for you to be able to demonstrate your own credibility, demonstrate the direction that you want to take your company in, demonstrate the careers that you can offer to people, demonstrate what are the opportunities to learn for the young people. And once that process starts to get going, then you can start looking at other forms of getting people on board. Having said that, there is never a dearth of talent in our great country. There is more than enough knowledge, more than enough talent. The biggest gap is, how do you match the skills of young people with the needs of the businesses, whether it's a startup or whether it's a large company? And that is the gap that people are trying to fill. And of course, now new technology has come up. So there are a lot of the search firms are using artificial intelligence to be able to predict kind of skill sets that you need, to predict the kind of people who can come on. So I think those are some of the things that are there, and I'm sure I'll be able to answer in more detail as the discussion progresses.
Sure. So you're absolutely correct, Ashutosh. I mean, in a country like ours, where the demographics, perhaps as you would think about from a talent perspective, are tilted, perhaps where we have a large pool of young talent available.
Correct.
Whatever the numbers say, I think more than 50% of our population tends to be below 40 or below 35, which is a huge amount of young people available as a pool. But there is also perhaps a tag. And again, I mean, with all your 4 decades of experience, I'd be curious to know, India churns out, for instance, a lot of engineers, perhaps more than US and China combined. But there's the question of how many of them are employable. So if you're in a startup kind of an environment, when all of a sudden there is a rapid growth, what do you do? How much of the talent have you seen personally where you feel that, do I just kind of get on board people because I need it, because I've got to ramp up, or how do you tackle some of that?
So when you bring on board your first set of hires, whether they're the Gen Z or the millennials or maybe older people also, in the early stages of a startup, everyone is scrambling to do everything. Because, the founder, and as I've written in one of my books, as the founder of Guardian, I've gone and cleaned toilets, and I've gone in to mop the shop floors, the Guardian show stores and the floors. I have mopped that also. And I think that is the time when the first and most basic quality that is needed by any founder is, number one, complete trust. And number two, removal of all ego that we all tend to have, ahankar. And I used to tell a lot of my young colleagues, because I used to talk to them when we had over 1,200 people working in Guardian, that at their first meeting that would happen before they joined, I would say that whenever you start going to a Guardian store, remember to remove 2 things. Number one is take off your ego and hang it on the hook behind your bathroom door. And the second one was take off your watch and leave it by your bedside table, because there's no place in retail, or for that matter at work, for your ego or for your watch. When you have to work, you have to work. And to that extent, I do tend to agree with what Mr. Narayan Murthy has recently said, that young people need to work longer hours in India.
Yeah, it's created a big debate, but
absolutely, that's why I've said it.
Correct, absolutely. And I was just reading in the LinkedIn half an hour ago back, where it says not about the hours, but it's really trying to push yourself out of the comfort zone. And okay, so you're right about trying to pick someone with the right attitude, with the right work ethic.
Yeah.
The question then becomes, of course, is that at the end of the day, when you're established and you have processes in place, you have an HR, but in a startup kind of an environment, you're kind of running multiple sort of tracks at the same time, right? So then comes the question of getting teams in place, getting them organized, getting them to collaborate, getting them to really kind of work together, right? Because if the people strategy in a way kind of goes wrong, right? Everything is hinged upon that, right? The VC says, the BE says that, look, we want X amount of growth but how do you get that? Yeah. So what are the ways, and what have you seen, right? How do you manage some of that? Because you get into an environment with a lot of effort of recruiting the right people. But now that you've done, you certainly don't have the time to kind of manage maybe in the traditional sense that you would, with BAUs and so on, with in a large setup. So maybe you can share, how do startups do it?
So, there's some very interesting dynamics that take place when the founder and his or her first team starts to grow. Once the business starts to grow and more people start to come in, the first set of people who feel the most insecure are the first team members, because now they do not get the same time as they used to from the founder. And therefore, very often, the first set of people who resign and leave are people who are part of the core team, because they start seeing that, the founder has no time for me now. Now, the moment that starts to happen, that's when your first level of professionalization or more people start to come in, because now people are joining you not because of your own credibility alone, but now they are joining you because they have started to see that this business is beginning to ramp up and is likely to go places. So you'll get, much better marketing people, you'll get much better operations people, supply chain people, etc., etc. And that is where the second set of the dynamics of human relations start to come in. You probably get a really good human resources manager, but then they have their own set of, they all carry their own baggage. They all carry their own, the learnings from different organizations. So that's when the first set of clashes start, that people start saying, oh, this is how it used to happen in that company. And someone else says, no, but this is how it used to happen in that company. And then the founder's role starts to change, because now the founder has to start to say, how do I pull together the knowledge that I have got from so many different places into something that I would call a culture, into something that I would call the knowledge of the organization that I am creating. And that is where a lot of the young people have to then start to accept, saying, this is, and I to use the Guardian story, someone would come from so-and-so chain, and I'd keep telling them, I said, we've got to develop what I would call the Guardian way. And I think that is what a startup founder needs to do. And his or her young team needs to then be able to support them in this kind of endeavor.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I recall reading Bill Gates' book, where back in the early days, he would personally go and meet every single programmer that would come into Microsoft. And it was a moment of pride for every programmer to say, I met Bill, and we would sit down and we would actually look at the code. And of course, as the company scale, it's just simply impossible.
Absolutely.
You're correct. So, Ashutosh, maybe I, double click and dive a little bit into your Guardian story. Can you share within that whole experience, right? How was it for you in terms of recruiting? What was the lead time like? Were there moments where perhaps, did that become almost like, if this wasn't done well, then perhaps the growth may have been halted. And then what are the ways in which you are ensuring the proximity, the culture, as you said, the collaboration? That's so critical. So yeah, I'd love to hear how that went.
So when you come to service businesses like retail, or for that matter call centers, or even technology companies, I think what is very important is to have a strong bench strength, so that what is most critical is what the customer is looking for. So you cannot tell a customer, and we did have some instances where a Guardian store did not open on time because there weren't enough people allocated to that store. Now, these are ways that businesses commit harakiri when a customer is there to see why to buy something and say the store hasn't opened. Why? Because I don't have people. Right. And we see this all the time in airlines where a plane gets delayed. Why? Because the crew hasn't arrived on time, and so on and so forth. So I think what is critical is to make sure that the bench strength is adequate. And again, it's a delicate balance. You could end up with too many people on the bench who are waiting to do something. And therefore, this is a huge cost to the company. And yet the balance has to be that you don't run short of people. The second thing that you asked me was about culture, and I think building a culture is very, very, very critical. And a major uh, factor in building culture is what a founder believes their company should be like. Whether it is in terms of doing business, whether it is in terms of treating their own people, whether it is working with consumers, whether it is working with your suppliers or any other stakeholders. So that is a culture that needs to be developed and built, and it's a slow process. It needs everyone's buy-in, and because companies get large, it is also the DNA of a company that needs to be built into every human being, and that's a process that needs to go through. So I've often been asked this question, that who's responsible for culture, and I've said the founder or the CEO, because I've heard a lot of people tell me that, oh, we've told our HR head to do it, and now it's up to them to do it.
Yeah.
So I think these are both very important factors. You need to have enough people available, and second is to knit them into the culture of the company, which itself is a fragile for a startup, and therefore, the founder himself or herself has to walk the talk.
Sure. No, excellent. So one question again to build on that, Ashutosh, is that since our focus is Gen Z, there is enough out there that says that they're not loyal and they want to hop jobs and so on and so forth. And perhaps one can say that maybe the choices are also more. I've seen where they want to know, if it's a traditional company, to say, hey, when can I become a vice president? Or can you tell me if I will reach X in 10 years or 15 years? Now, in a startup environment, obviously, as you mentioned, it's the credibility of the owner, the trust, and so on, right? But at some point, I, as an employee, have to feel that I'm growing. And therefore, you perhaps don't have, and I'd be curious to know, the luxury where you have a traditional kind of an HR function who puts you through training programs and say, go do this, or, go venture out. And so how do you in that environment, keep them motivated to say that, there is something bigger for you on the horizon? Or because you could easily probably, there could come a time where maybe you ran so fast in that 1 year or 2 years, and then there's a burnout, unless there is some kind of an assurance to say that, I'll be doing something better, bigger. So I'm curious to know, if you saw that within your own journey, and, how do startup owners manage that?
So, Nikhil, my first comment to you is that it's not just Gen Zs.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a question of an age. I remember when I was 22 years old, I was also wanting to say, and in those days, we didn't have any of these alphabet soup now, attached to
right.
you. But at 22 years old, I was equally ambitious, and I was equally keen to say, how soon can I get the next promotion and become a director or vice president or whatever else. But I think the realization that comes to everybody at the end of 5, 7, 8, 10 years of working is that there is no shortcut to growth. You may have 1 year which is very good. You may have 2 years which is very good. You could have 1 year which is flat. You could have 1 year which is a decline in your own performance. But at the end of the day, the trajectory has to be moving upwards, and you need to keep getting more and more happiness with the work that you're doing. Now, again, when you look at it from a young person's perspective, what are the few set of drivers? And that is to create wealth. I need to get myself a car. I need to buy myself a house. I need all the luxuries of it, and they must do that. But once you've got that first set of things, now, some people may want a bigger car. Some people may want a bigger house. Some people may want bigger money. But each of these comes at different stages of life. So I think from a startup founder's perspective, it is their responsibility to make sure that they paint the vision of the company so clearly to young Gen Z employees that here is a company that will not just value you. Here is a company that will not just compensate you, but here is a company that will give you job satisfaction. Now, job satisfaction is again something that will get understood a little more as you get older, because initially, um, every the young person rightly believes that they know what the right answer is, and their boss doesn't seem to know anything at all. And every generation has the same kind of thing. I'm sure you've seen this even when you sit and talk with your own school fellows. They're, oh, I'm from the batch class of 1996, but all batches after us have been quite useless. Yeah. And I think everyone says the same thing.
Right.
So I think we need to, young people, old people, they need that little dose of patience, because right things happen to you. Right things happen to most people unless you go and mess up your career. Some may do it in 3 years, some may do it in 5 years, some may do it in 7 years, but the trajectory has to be in the right direction.
Sure. Sure, absolutely. And but again, just one more question on that, Ashutosh, and then I've got one final question. Is that oftentimes in startups, obviously you've got a success story, everybody is celebrating and wants to kind of then makes it to the news and everyone's proud. But there are enough stories out there, right, where perhaps and this whole debate about how much money is coming now into the system from VCs and so on, and is it rightly justified, and profitability and all of that. But let's assume that despite all of that, like if your startup goes through a lean patch or a bad patch, and all of a sudden what started and looked promising, again you've got a young or perhaps even an experienced pool of people, right? What's your advice to the young Gen Zs to look at? How do you look at that, right? In other words, do you just say, do I now tend to say that, what, maybe a startup wasn't for me, I'm better off going to just an established company. They can tell me where a career path is. What would you say to them? What's your advice there?
So again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I used to teach at IIM Rohtak class in entrepreneurship, and I used to talk to many, many people. I think the basic thing to ask if a company has run into rocky or stormy weather is there enough cash in the bank to be able to sustain you for 12 months, 18 months, 24 months? I mean, if there's not enough money for someone to pay monthly salary, then I think it's time for you to call it quits and go away. But if it's a question of the business plan not delivering what people may have said, by December next year, and there's a thing, okay, it'll take 2 years, and you realize that you are a key person within the entrepreneur's scheme of things, then you may just decide to stay on. Because, remember that whichever company that you may go and work for, you need to reestablish yourself. In an existing company where if you spend 3 years or 4 years, you've established yourself, you've got the credibility, you've been given independence, you're trusted as a person. But if you walk away, it's not necessary that you'll get the same kind of support immediately, because there'll be other people you'll be competing with. So there's no right or wrong answer. Many people may choose to go and work for a large company, which is very, very good because you learn some good practices. Many people may want to start off on their own. Many people may want to pivot and go into some other startup. So it's entirely very personal.
Sure. Ashutosh, you are an advisor to many CEOs. You've obviously built one very successful company, in addition to a very illustrious career with a large company. As you look at the kind of startup ecosystem and the companies or the CEOs that you talk to, any other success stories that you can think of where, in addition to your own story that you mentioned, that where, people have managed getting talent superbly well, keeping the flock together, and all the things that we've talked about, just maybe another story, any success story that you feel you can.
So, Nikhil, there will be many companies who, have built, all the tech companies are great examples of how they've built such large, bases for employment. I was reading this afternoon somewhere that the Tata Group, which is one of the oldest groups of India, employs 900,000 people, with a very strong culture. So, the tech companies employ a huge number. But on the other hand, there are 75,000 startups in India. And if all of them are employing even 10 people on average, then that's 750,000 people employed there. So I think it's, I'm not sure if I can give you a very straight answer on that, but there are many, many, many entrepreneurs who have built some amazing companies, giving amazing career opportunities. And what is very important also to study is that how many of these leaders of these companies, how many have spawned many more startups from the people they have trained with themselves? I'm sure there must be thousands of such examples.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's say just as a closing out, Ashutosh, what would be your advice if I'm a young entrepreneur or an entrepreneur who's venturing into the deep waters here?
Yeah.
What are some of the do's and don'ts especially from the talent perspective, right? Whether it's an experience pool or the Gen Z that we spoke about.
Yeah.
Keeping in mind the recruiting process strategy, that's number one. And the second part of the question would be, what advice would you have for the young Gen Zers coming in to say that, look, hey, you're entering into a slightly different setup, and maybe these are 2 or 3 things you should do and should not do. So one from the startup perspective, second from the
okay.
Yeah.
So from a startup, from the perspective of someone who wants to start up on their own, my one advice would be focus on something that will solve a real problem. I've often seen this, that the startup entrepreneur says, I've got this great idea, I'm going to build a product. And then, a lot of money goes into building it. And then they suddenly realize there's no market for it. Right. So therefore, I think that is one thing which, I would strongly advise startup entrepreneurs. From the perspective of someone who is going to start working for a company or a startup entrepreneur, I always say that find a role or find a job that loves you. We all say go and find a company that you love, but I'm saying, when I say find a job that loves you, what I really mean to say is look for a job where you will get the same amount of satisfaction as the founder will get from all your contribution you will make to it.
Yeah.
So find a job that loves you is an important factor.
Beautiful. Yeah. What a beautiful advice. Again, friends, we've heard from Ashutosh's years of experience, both from managing and leading a large company to really, even in a retail organization that he's built, right? How talent becomes so pivotal to the success, the need for having a bench, the need for creating culture, the need for being transparent, and just kind of sharing, because as you said, the CEO needs to walk the talk, and just how do you scale talent in this kind of an environment? So really enjoyed this conversation, Ashutosh. Thank you once again. You've shared some super nuggets from your story and all the work that you do in advising CEOs. It's been a pleasure and learned a lot. And I look forward to meeting you in person sometime when I'm in Delhi next.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikhil. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.